This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. My name's Nick Hudson. Got a wonderful show coming up for you today, as always. We're going to be starting with my review of Carrie, which is playing at the Southwark Playhouse, and then we're going to be hearing from our friend Dominic McChesney as he continues our discussion on Carrie. And then Dominic is going to take over the show as he discusses a musical called Nick and Nora. So, without further ado, let's get on with the show. I want to talk about Carrie, the musical that is playing at the Southwark Playhouse. It's just opened. I saw it, and I'm a fan of horror. I like horror. I like Stephen King. I think more of his stuff needs to be musicalised. Musical of The Shining, anyone? It? This musical is infamous in the history of musical theatre. The RSC in 1988 produced this show in Stratford, and then it went over to Broadway, where it played approximately 5 performances. I'll just let that sink in. 5 performances. Obviously, they were trying to be straight off the heels of the success of Les Miserables. And in a way, this show has elements of Les Miserables in it. There's a hell of a lot of ballads and big emotional, the power ballads, which Les Mis is kind of famous for. But it just doesn't land. It didn't land, and I still think there are slight issues with the show. I sat there thinking last night, you can see why this failed. I felt last night when I saw it that I was watching more of a museum piece than a great musical. Now, the piece has changed. They've brought it forward to the modern day, which doesn't work because it jars with the very 80s music that the show has. And I know it's been reorchestrated. Some of it to lovely effect, but some of it is just still a bit too 80s in its synth-heavy timbre. Based on the novel by Stephen King, it is about a girl who is tormented by her mother, who develops telekinetic powers to get revenge on the world around her. Does it sound similar to another rather successful Royal Shakespeare Company musical? I don't know, maybe Roald Dahl was a fan of Stephen King as well, but we'll never know. Where I felt the musical worked best was in the scenes where the mother, beautifully played in this production by Kim Criswell, and Carrie herself are at loggerheads and having discussions and arguments. It's not comfortable to watch, and that's another issue I have with the piece. It's just not very nice. There's no humour at all, which is a bit of a shame. You need something to lighten the mood in this piece. They try to do it with the kind of High School Musical-esque melodrama that goes on, and sadly a lot of it just doesn't land as comedy, not that it was meant to in the first place. Generally seeing Fringe in general in London is that the casts are so young, and in some cases, as with this one, still in musical theatre training, that they're so young and powerful and determined to give the best performance you'll ever see. And that's what you get with these Fringe shows. I remember seeing Titanic at the Southwark Playhouse, and whilst the piece itself was a load of old tut, the performances were stellar. Evelyn Hoskins, who plays Carrie White, you fall in love with her the minute she comes on the stage. She presents such a wonderful persona of someone who has been abused her whole life by her religious mad mother and continues to be struggling with the demands of growing up. We talked about Kim Criswell, who gives a wonderful performance. All the other kids in the school, I just don't think the school stuff works as well as the scenes with the mother and Carrie. It's a shame because a lot of the musical moments happen within the school. This leads me to another issue I had with the piece, which was the sound. The band was simply far too loud, and there's a lot of complex singing going on in this show. There's a lot of contrapuntal writing, which I love, but you simply couldn't get what they were saying from the get-go of this show when they all come on and all singing different lines. You think, what point are you trying to make at this moment? I want to give special credit as well to Jodie Jacobs, whom we last spoke to at the Dress Circle benefit event, but she also was in Rock of Ages. She was completely unrecognisable as the gym teacher, Miss Gardner, in this production, and she gives a wonderful performance. I also want to give special credit to Jeremy Chenick, I think I'm pronouncing your name right, Jeremy, who is the special effects designer for this show. Now, seeing a fringe show, you generally think you're not going to get much bang for your buck, but you do get bangs for your bucks, or bangs for your pounds, in this production. I'm not going to reveal what happens at the very end, but there's a lovely moment which was to me even more impressive than what happens at the end, a chair slides across the stage by itself, and then a book levitates in midair. We don't even get that in Matilda, so it's nice to see some real, and I was 3 rows from the front, so it's nice to see some real close-up illusionary going on in this show, and it's something that I felt the show could have done with a bit more. Now, due to the odd design of this stage, it's a kind of square stage that's thrusting out into the audience, so we were sat on the left side, the front facing on the right side, so not all bits are visible to everyone, which is a bit of a shame. The other issue I had with the score was that I felt that it didn't offer enough variety in an evening's worth of listening to 2.5 hours worth of music. It was very, whilst the melodies were lovely, the whole, as I said, the whole timbre was very was very linear. It was a singular sound that the whole evening had, which, whilst I appreciate one is trying to create a sound world, it's nice to have a bit of variety in the evening. Of course, the school has a more rocky sound, and the home life of the mother has a more, almost a John Rutter-esque sound with a bit of American gospel thrown in there. The score was written by a chap appropriately called Michael Gore, who has won 2 Oscars for his work on Fame, so he obviously knows what he's doing. I got from his credits that he's more of a producer than a composer, but, you know, he's famous for writing Carrie, if you want to put it like that. The musical is playing until the 30th of May at the Southwark Playhouse. It's selling very well, so they might extend it, we don't know, might move to the West End. For more information about the production, you can head, of course, to southwarkplayhouse.co.uk. Do go and see this show just to see a piece of British musical theatre history and what went wrong. I've seen a video on YouTube, and that's all I'll say, of the original Stratford production, and I can say it's not as bad as that. We're going to hear about that production now. Our friend Dominic McChesney spoke to a friend of his about the original Stratford production of Carrie the Musical, and this is what they had to say.
Musical Talk.
I'm sat here in sunny Kuala Lumpur with my friend Peter Jameson. Hello, Peter.
Hi.
Welcome to Musical Talk.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about a historical show.
Yes.
It is world famous. Well, it's certainly famous in Broadway for being one of the biggest flops ever to have happened.
It
had
was,
books
wasn't it?
reading it. We're going to talk about Carrie the Musical. I saw a recent post on a Facebook group that I belong to about a new revival of Carrie.
Yes, I have that recording actually.
You have?
I am an avid fan of Carrie. I think a lot of its success for me was the wonderful and brilliant Lindsay Haitley in the lead role, who was cast fantastically because she's beautiful, but she just had a vulnerability and innocence. It was just fantastic vocally, and you know, for me, she brought so much to that role, so much, and you know, you really just felt for her.
Because we both saw the original production in
Stratford upon Avon,
which was
1988, February.
When we were
We
mere
were still
children.
in short trousers.
I wish. And I got my first credit card I'd ever had, and they sent me one of these things through saying, you can now, because you have a credit card, you can book tickets for Carrie, the world premiere of Carrie the Musical.
Really? I didn't have a credit
that's how I
card
knew
at
about
that time.
it. So,
I knew about it because I think I was doing a production of The Wizard of Oz or something, and the cast were talking about it, and that initially got me interested. And then I just...
You went to Italia Conti, didn't you?
No, Sylvia Young.
Sylvia, was Lindsay Haitley from...
No, she was from Italia Conti.
Ah, right, okay.
Yes.
Right,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
But you were very much in the theatre world as a young age, whereas I grew up in Devon, so
yes, I
we
very
had
much
nothing.
so. I went to Sylvia's from the age of 13, was also in other groups and Saturday classes, so I was very much interested and...
So you would have heard all the buzz before it happened?
Yes, yeah.
Now, it also included, it was choreography by Debbie Allen.
Choreography by Debbie Allen. Terry Hands, I think, was the director.
Jean Anthony Ray, who was Leroy from Fame.
But basically, for me, it was just like every single thing about it didn't gel. had these wonderful performances, some absolutely beautiful songs, but then the costumes looked completely... They were all like in white, all the high school kids, and the set was non-existent. It was like a square white box for the gym. Everything took place in there. Carrie's house was a sort of set within the set that just slid forward and consisted of a rocking chair, a trapdoor, and a door.
I remember that being very black, but it had to be black so they could do
very black but very dark. And whoever designed the costumes, not to mean that rudely, but there was no thought. They were leg warmers, lycra cat suits. The characters just were all dressed the same, all in white.
I remember that
it was
in a white set. It was very, very 80s looking.
Very 80s looking. It was like two shows. You had these wonderful sort of almost like aria type songs and passionate sort of
hymns that the mother sang.
The mother sang were heartbreaking. And Eve Was Weak was a fantastic, where she's dragging Carrie into the cellar. Wonderful song.
The mother was played by the Broadway legend that is Barbara Cook. She was the original Carrie in Carousel. She was in Plain and Fancy. She was in The Gay Love. She Loves Me. She's had an amazing career.
Yes.
Now, she was phenomenal.
Yes.
Her voice singing those songs with Lindsay
She was
Haley
phenomenal
was
because the voice was so... The songs were so dramatic and powerful and sort of high, and they blended with Lindsay Haley, but for the part of Margaret, which is a fanatical Bible basher, that kind of tone and sound that Barbara Cook has was fantastic.
Yes.
But I have to say, Betty Buckley was phenomenal.
Oh, really?
She took over.
She was... I didn't see Betty Buckley, so...
Barbara Cook was very, very good, and she's a legend. But I found her quite stilted in the part as Margaret. I mean, she had this humongous, massive white staircase, symbolic staircase that happened at the end. The poor woman probably thought she was going to break her neck. So, I'd be stilted as well.
That was very bizarre. So, to jump around a little bit, the final scene in the movie... How does Carrie die in the movie? She just blows up the school, does she?
She shuts herself in a closet in the house and just makes the house fall down after she's murdered her mother. But obviously, that's so dramatic for the film. And the recent remake with Julianne Moore and Chloe Grace Moretz, which I was sadly disappointed about, was just almost like a real-for-real remake. But the actual musical really did try and go back to the book where Carrie stops her mother's heart, but Carrie's mother actually stabs Carrie in the Stephen King novel, and that's what happened in the musical. Her mother stabbed her on the stairs.
Now what happened was that, so after the prom scene, which we'll go back to, but after the prom scene, they brought down this huge, enormous, giant white staircase.
Just descended.
And I remember watching it going, what does that mean? And then somebody told me the other day, there was meant to be the steps of
heaven.
No. It's the steps of the school.
Well, yes, I thought it was, but I also symbolically thought it was supposed to be like the steps to the school. But I mean, what school has 500 steps going up to it? But I thought it was to the school. But I also thought on another level, it was supposed to be a symbolic stairway to heaven.
Oh, right. It was very Greek tragedy.
Yes, very. And again, I can understand they were white. Carrie was dressed in white or pink or something.
The mother was in black.
The mother was in black. It just, but she dies in Sue's arms at the bottom of the staircase, which is an incredibly moving part of the show. I mean, Sue Snell's character is the only decent one really. Not the only decent one, but in the show she's depicted as the only decent one in the book, who is actually genuinely caring for Carrie and realise what a terrible, humiliating thing they did to her at the beginning in the showers. Sue Snell's character is a lovely character, and it's very moving, that bit.
I don't like using this word, but I'm going to. The great iconic scene from Carrie is when she gets the bucket of pig's blood dumped on her head, which was a letdown and a half, because they just dumped the bucket on her head and it just looked like something from Wurzel Cummings.
Gene Anthony Ray ran on and looked like he'd taken the bucket out of his mother's garden or Carrie's mother's garden that she's using to do the lawn with, and filled it up with red blood, paint, whatever it was they did, and threw it over her. But I did hear that they tried many ways to do that. In the recent revival, they did it very cleverly with her shadow on the back wall and a bucket, so you still got the suspension, but it was like almost like projected onto the back wall. And when it did actually go over her, it did go over her like it does in the film and in the book, and you get the suspension, the lead up. I mean, I think everybody was waiting for the prom scene.
Yes.
So for them to run on and dump a plastic bucket on her head was the most... it's like having no Christmas presents on Christmas morning for me. I was devastated.
There was no payoff. It was what we were waiting for. That and the mother being killed by all the electrical instruments, which doesn't happen in the book.
And as much as I love Carrie's character, and I'm totally on Carrie's side, I want her to blow the prom up. Those kids are disgusting. They are the horror in that show for me.
The one thing I remember which I did like was when she started going crazy, apart from the pretty naff lasers. But they did do an effect of all the doors locking, and they made it sound like they were locking behind you. So they did.
That was very good.
It was very simple, and it was very clever. And
they did that at the beginning, Dominic, if you remember. When you sat down before the show started, it was like all the doors to the theatre.
I think they knew what a bad show it was, so they didn't want us to escape. So they probably word it.
A bad show, but actually, I am such a cult fan, and I love some of the music. So bad show, completely like a car crash of a show with so many different influences that just did not work together. But
it was just so many voices. I mean, the costume designer, like you said, was
absolutely
in the Kill the Pig scene.
Yes,
they had everyone dressed in these what I can only describe as 80s bondage gear.
Yes, it was.
It was these weird punk
Yep.
harnesses and things. And
I know.
It was Do Me a Favour was the song.
Do Me a Favour,
It's interesting to remember that I can recall all the songs. I only saw it once.
What's interesting about the remake, they've got new songs in, changed songs, like the opening number in, I like very much in the new, and I liked it in the original, but instead of being set in the girls' gym, they've changed the tempo of it and they've incorporated it with all the boys and the girls singing it as an opening number.
Oh, that's interesting. In the version we saw, it was just all the girls doing this.
It was like a Jane Fonda workout.
It was
video.
unbelievable. I was exhausted by the time it finished.
It was an amazing routine, but it became a dance show. And for me, Carrie, it's got such amazing characters. That show should be heavily stooped in the acting and the singing.
It should be dramatic.
It should be dramatic. And, you need individuality for the whole story to work.
Yeah. The story it's dramatic, but it's got supernatural elements. Maybe with some of the amazing magic effects that they do on stage, they could actually achieve a level which they weren't able to do it. Because in the original production, she sings a song called I Am Not Alone.
I love it.
Where she does a tap dance
with UV puppets.
With their own shoes, which on a UV background with UV lighting.
It got very panto at that bit.
That was one of those moments you could have jaw open and hand in mouth.
Yeah. But the song itself is
a great song.
And they've cut that, sadly, from the original.
Oh, really?
And they've also cut Dream On from the original. Not the original, sorry. The updated version that I'm talking about.
Dream On was in the
showers.
Oh,
so
really? I like that song.
I know, I liked that. That's gone. I'm Not Alone's gone, and they've replaced it with other ones.
Okay.
It's well worth a listen. But yes, I mean, the UV was cringe, wasn't it? It really was.
I mean, do you know if they've still retained an element of...
No UV in the new one.
But do they have objects that move when she gets angry, apart from the light bulb exploding?
Just sort of like chair, and I've not seen it in full, the updated version. I've only seen it off YouTube because it was in America and not in England yet. I mean, I think they do incorporate that, but I can't say personally because I've not seen, but I know there's definitely no UV scene in it.
Right.
The main thing for me as well is the new version's done in a much smaller theatre, much more intimate. The characters are brought up to date. They're just high school kids. There's no leg warmers, and I think it was very much a victim of its time, the original version of Carrie,
because
of the 80s. As much as I love the kids from Fame, for me, it was like that. It was like two shows, like I said earlier. It was like there was like a Kids from Fame show when there's one song, Do Me a Favour and Don't Waste the Moon and the Stars.
Yes.
Now that was like lots of cars piled on each other, like as in the set, and they were supposed to be a driving, and it was something we were watching a different show. You had all this drama with Carrie and her mother. Also, what I was going to say was the massiveness of the theatre. Then there's lack of costumes, the lack of claustrophobic atmosphere. Didn't help the show, and the new version has been taken right down. I mean, not masses of set, not just a stark, empty, square stage.
I've thought about it. Maybe they really were going for that Greek tragedy feel, which they got the tone of the piece wrong. So you believe that it's probably much better now? It's a chamber piece.
I believe it's much better now on some levels. The cast are fantastic, but no one but Lindsay Haitley for me will ever be Carrie, because she, for me, that voice, and it made her a musical theatre star. She's still very much in the West End now.
Yeah, I mean, it must have knocked her for 6.
The reviews for the show, I think she came out as only she can, because she's fantastic. Not
so they appreciated her, but they just slated the show.
Yeah,
so
she did win something for it. Yeah,
because I mean I've seen her in things since, she is wonderful.
I'm a huge fan. Absolutely, I think she's one of the best things that musical theatre's ever had in this country. And what I would say really for the show, there are things about the original, just some of the performances really, I suppose for me, that they just have that edge.
It was great to see. Was Debbie Allen in it?
No, but she was sat in front of me with a notepad taking notes when I went to see it.
That's funny. But I remember Jean Anthony Ray seeing him and thinking he was amazing.
I thought he was an amazing dancer. I just thought he was...
But he was Leroy.
I didn't think he was right for the... Not right, he wasn't wrong for the part. It's not how I see Billy Nolan,
He's not the one who actually goes to the
Billy,
prom.
he's Chris, who I think is one of the best bitches in horror movies and musical theatre now, obviously. She is just vile. That girl, that character. And I think it's wonderful because I think it really highlights how genuinely lovely Sue is and the differences between them. And they were friends, and it's lovely because that story's not just about one girl, that's about three of them really, especially Sue and Carrie. It shows Sue's growth as a character, Margaret's fear of losing the power and control over her daughter. The Chris character doesn't grow because she's just vile. So I think the original, for me, will have the edge, but I'm so pleased they've redone it. I did think some of the original cast looked a little bit old.
Yes.
But then again, I did Grease up until I was 32, playing this pastiche teenager. You can get away with it, but if you're just stuck in a pair of leg warmers and a white catsuit or a white pair of trousers, you're not going to look like anything really, but someone...
I remember thinking that they were very physically mature for teenagers.
Yes,
so.
They were. I mean, it's such a shame because I remember wanting to love it, and I certainly didn't hate it, and I did absolutely love elements of it. But for me, as a whole, there were so many different elements that just didn't work as a one.
Visually, it wasn't very interesting.
Visually, it was boring.
Yeah.
But when
the dancing was amazing.
Yeah. And when Lindsay Haitley came on, she was just, you couldn't take your eyes off of her. You knew a star had been born. And then in New York, when it went across with Betty Buckley, I absolutely would have loved to have seen that. And as short as the run was, you've only got to go on YouTube and look at the skeletal, thin, sort of contrast to Barbara Cook way that Betty Buckley plays that Margaret character, the nervous energy, the fantastic voice, the way she drags Lindsay Haitley around that stage and throws her into the sort of trapdoor. It's a trapdoor rather than a closet in the show. It's just the two of them. It's so dramatic.
Yeah.
So for me, as wonderful as Barbara Cook was, what I loved about Betty Buckley from the things I've seen, she was so physical with Margaret and literally must have been exhausted.
Barbara Cook was this imposing, huge character in this huge black robe, whereas I haven't seen a Betty Buckley. I do know the story, apparently, that Barbara Cook didn't actually sign the contract. That she went into the show and hadn't signed the contract. I don't know whether we can say this or not. But when it was then confirmed to be going to Broadway, she was called into the office and they said, we've got some good news, it's going to Broadway. And Barbara Cook said, that's very good, but I won't be going with it. They were like, but you've signed the contract. She was like, no, I haven't. And so that's the story I heard. I don't know.
Well, I heard, you were not heard, when I was on my way to see it, I remember rushing to get the train at King's Cross. I'm going all the way up to Stratford on my own on a Saturday to see the matinee. And I read in the paper on my journey up there that Barbara Cook had just wanted to, or had just opted out of what she'd called a sinking ship while there was still time. And I was actually travelling up to see the show, and I thought, oh dear. I've also heard another story, and again, I'm not. This is what I've heard.
We don't know if these stories are true.
We're not saying,
yeah.
I heard that she nearly got decapitated by the staircase or something.
Oh gosh, yes, yes, that's very true.
Or a piece of scenery.
A piece of scenery nearly.
And I think that probably put her off quite a bit. If she ain't going to tumble down the stairs, she's going to be decapitated.
Yeah.
God forbid, yeah.
Yes, indeed. I'm so glad that I saw it because we saw a piece of history.
Musical theatre history.
Musical theatre history. And it is nice that it has some legs. I had a friend who was in a recent revival in Melbourne, in Australia.
They've done it there as well, yeah.
And she played Sue, funny enough.
Did she?
Yes, she's just finished in Legally Blonde there. and then she went into that.
I think it's a wonderful story. I think it's a heartbreaking story.
So you think all the elements are there, it's just it needs a really good production.
You know, they're always cast very, very well. I just feel that I don't know if people get it. I don't know if maybe the subject's a little bit too full on for some people. I don't know if people just think it's a horror film.
People think. I mean, my thoughts was it was a horror film. I didn't realise it was about a girl going through
being horribly bullied.
Being horribly bullied. I mean, I just thought it was a girl with telekinesis. The funny thing was, I hated horror films at the time. I love musicals. So it was one of those rare occasions where horror and musicals meet.
What's surprising about it is it's not quite what you imagine it to be. You think it's a horror film, horror girl going mad. Actually, the horror are the bullies, are the completely overbearing religious freak of a mother. That's the horror. Yeah. Carrie's the victim.
Yes.
And that's what makes it a very touching, tender, special story for me anyway.
Yeah. Well, one day, let's hope that it will happen.
Our teenage days are over, so there's nothing for us in it.
I don't know, there could be a very interesting version. I could play the mother, you can play Carrie.
Well, this is it.
I think physically, we've got everything.
You'd have trouble getting me down the trap door.
I have trouble getting me down the stairs. One day.
Well,
that's obviously the ideal casting.
That is the ideal
Is me
casting.
as Margaret and you as Carrie.
Absolutely. I'll start looking at wigs.
I'm going to go with my natural hair. Peter Jameson, thank you very much for your time.
Dominic Monchesi, my lovely friend, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And here's to a revival in London.
Indeed.
You're listening to Musical Talk.
Do you have a bucket list? A list of things that you wish to do or see before you depart this mortal coil? And do you have a musical bucket list? A list of shows that you have never seen but know of and would love to see staged? Shows that may have failed, been forgotten, or just disappeared? Perhaps you long to see Drat the Cat, or perhaps Carrie. Mine was the musical Nick and Nora. Hello, my name is Dominic McChesney. I am not Thos Ribbits, although we do share the same barber. We also share a high regard for the works of the composer Charles Strauss. Charles Strauss is one of the most prolific creators of musical theatre, and his catalogue of work covers so many subjects, stories and styles that we would be here forever if I was to start listing them. There are 2 excellent episodes in the Musical Talk archives where Thos talks to Charles about his work. I would highly recommend them. They are episodes 157 and 158. Over the years, Charles Strauss has collaborated with many great book writers and lyricists. And so, when it was announced back in the early 90s that he was writing a musical based on the 1930s detective characters Nick and Nora Charles, there was certainly an air of excitement. The book was to be written by Arthur Lawrence and the lyrics by Richard Maltby Jr. The cast included such Broadway stars as Barry Bostwick, Joanna Gleason, Deborah Monk, Chris Sarandon and Faith Prince. The cast and creatives had, on paper, everything going for it, and yet when it opened, after 72 previews on Broadway, it was sadly to not be a success, and closed after only 9 actual performances. It was nominated for a Tony Award for Best Original Score, and a cast album was released. So why did it flop? Over the years, I heard and read about how the show had been torn apart by critics and those that had seen it, and the stories of what a troubled production it had been. I became resolved to it never being seen again. Doubly annoying as I couldn't find out who the murderer was. Skip ahead 24 years, and to my absolute joy, I hear that it was being staged by the 42nd Street Moon Theatre Company in San Francisco. And so back in April, I was lucky enough to see for myself a fully staged production, and chat with the director of the show, Greg McKellen, and finally find out the killer's identity. First of all, you will hear the question and answer session with the cast and Greg that took place after the show, and then you'll hear my interview with Greg where we talk about Nick and Nora and the history of the 42nd Street Moon Theatre. By the way, if you do know the show but have never seen it, be prepared for spoilers. We will reveal who done it.
So, cut to whatever this is, 20 some odd years later, about 4 years ago, a small theatre company in Melbourne, Australia, got the rights from Arthur Lawrence to do a script-in-hand staged reading of it. And they did that. So then, because we had Charles Strauss here a few years ago, we had an 80th birthday celebration for him. Some of you may have seen that. It was over at the Alcazar, but I knew how to get in touch with him. And so I called and said, what about Nick and Nora? And he said, well, yeah, no one's touched it, but yeah, why not? Great. So we did. He sent me all the music, including a bunch of cut songs and all sorts of stuff. This show went through so many changes. There are only 4 songs in the show now that were in it from the very beginning when they did their very first demo recordings. And then almost every big number in the show, like Men and As Long As You're Happy, those are the later versions of songs that were completely different in those places. So it went through so much of that. Just during the previews, 71 performances, 8 different songs came and went. So, in fact, you may have known, for those of you who do know it or know the CD, some of the lyrics are different. We only put in one cut song called There's More, Nora's Number in Act 2. Was the only cut song that we put back. So here we are. It took a lot of work to kind of figure this out, to piece it together, various little bits of versions of things. When they did the CD, they changed a lot of the songs around for the CD. So trying to make sense of that, what things were like on Broadway, and then trying to also avoid some of the pitfalls that they found on Broadway. So there was a cocaine subplot. We got rid of that. That kind of seemed out of sync with Nick and Nora. So, here we are. This may be the last time it will ever be done. Who knows? But at least we have done it. I showed it to San Francisco. And one of the fun things about Nick and Nora is that they are, in fact, from San Francisco. You don't necessarily hook into that with Thin Man. They talk about them being from California. Or rather, in the first Thin Man movie. But they're San Franciscans.
In the second movie, they go back.
In the second movie, of course, yes, exactly. They go back to San Francisco. So anyway, we have our fabulous cast here. I think almost everybody. And so here are our Nick and our Nora. Ryan Drummond and Brittany Danielle. Aren't that many murder mystery musicals? There's the Mystery of Edwin Drood, there's Something's Afoot, there may be 1 or 2 others. Curtains, oh, of course. How could I forget that? City of Angels, right. So they're, about 5 or 6, and that's about it. So, you are playing an iconic couple, Nick and Nora. And, what's interesting is, when we first announced this, a lot of people said, who's going to be your William Powell and Myrna Loy? A couple of people, though, said, well, who's going to be Peter Lawford and Phyllis Kerr? So I hadn't realized the TV show was so present in some people's memories. So there is precedent for other Nicks and other Noras. So anything that kind of goes with that?
Yeah, well, in playing such iconic characters that kind of have their place in the collective American memory, you don't want to trap yourself as an actor into putting on an impersonation. So I did some research on the characters. I was not terribly familiar with the Thin Man. I'd certainly heard of the Thin Man, but I hadn't seen the movie or the TV show, so I went and looked at those through the miracle of the internet, and just kind of saw what the dynamic of the couple was and kind of how they played that dynamic, and then I kind of let it go and let the script tell me how to do the rest, because I didn't want to, impersonate Bill Powell. I didn't want to get into that. And so I thought, well, probably the best way to have a successful Nick is to kind of make your own. That's kind of true to the style of Nick and Nora, but not be an impersonation of the actors that came before you.
I tried to focus on the relationship. More what we had on stage and tried to make that believable. Watched a few things, but tried not to focus on that. Kind of the same story. We actually talked about this to someone that was interviewing us, Robert, and he asked us the same thing, and it sort of has been the same story from day one. We don't want to disappoint with impersonations, so let's just make what we have on stage just as believable.
And I think they're very successful.
Well,
they've been friends. They've been put down at least 2 or 3 other shows together.
Yes, this is our 3rd third show together, and interestingly enough, we also have the same birthday. Not the same year. But the same birthday. So if you have any astrological beliefs in you, maybe that has something to do with it. But this is our third show together, so we've known each other for 5 years.
Yeah, I want to say, first show we did together was The Wedding Singer. And
that was 2010.
Yeah,
so
not characters that were romantically involved.
She Loves Me was 2011.
And I don't think we spoke one word to each other in that show, so.
Yeah.
Well, but does that kind of play into your developing the Nick and Nora, the fact that you actually did have a history with each other?
That definitely helped, I think.
It doesn't hurt that he's amazing, so.
Well, yeah, as is she. Lovable in every way, but yeah, it helped that we were friends, so that we could be comfortable being a married couple on stage and having that sort of relationship and having it not be awkward from day one, because you don't have a lot of time to put the show up. We put it up in essentially 2.5 weeks. So if we were complete strangers, that would be a very short amount of time to pull off a convincing, such iconic married couple. So I was very happy that I got to play with someone who I already knew for years.
Now, yes.
I'd like to say that the costumes, the clothes, were extraordinary. Absolutely, I've never seen it.
Thank you. Hector Zavala coordinated that, and some of them came from various different places, including eBay, and especially one of our board members, Joanna Leighton of Vesney, who has a vintage collection. She's a member of the Art Deco Society, and she came down the day of our first dress rehearsal and brought what seemed to me like half her wardrobe. And so almost everything that the women are wearing in here is vintage. I mean, from the period.
That people that come to this will think of the Legion of Honor high style. The clothes on display there are of the quality that you're wearing. They're beautiful.
They are. They're beautiful.
It was a thought.
A really big thank you to Joanna. Yes?
I know this was a dated play when Nora borrowed her husband's charger plate.
Charger plates.
Yes, exactly. Which is not a term that we use anymore.
You know what's wonderful about it, though? It means the same things to me. To borrow that charger car.
Yes. Now, I'm curious, did any of you, when intermission came around, did any of you have an inkling who the killer might be?
No.
You did? No. Yeah, and you did. And were you right? Were you right about who? Yeah, you did, and you were right about who you guessed that it was. Interesting. If you know the Thin Man, the basic situation in this is the same. There is a woman who has been murdered, and we are led to believe that it's her boss, who is also her lover, who is the person who's killed her. But he has disappeared. And there is one person who keeps saying that they have seen him and talked to him and just saw him that morning, and it turns out he's actually dead. And of course the person who's been saying that is the person who killed him. So there aren't two killers in there. There's actually only one. And the Thin Man, is not William Powell. He's the guy who gets killed. So it's interesting. But then they decided everybody thought it was William Powell, so then they made it that he was a Thin Man. So the plot is very similar. Now, Allison, have you ever played a murderer before?
I don't think so.
You played a movie star before.
Yeah,
I know
that I
that.
have done. I don't think I've ever been a murderer.
How about you, Ruben?
Yeah.
Because our murderers are very sympathetic. It's really the two victims as well as the police lieutenant who are the villains of this play. Right. And the murderers are rather sympathetic. Allison, any particular challenge to this?
Yeah, not tipping my hat too soon. Wanted there to be some element of surprise later on. Yeah, I think that was probably my biggest challenge. Was not coming on too strong from the beginning, so not giving anything away.
By the way, considering how Arthur Lawrence felt about Hollywood, I think probably the line he had the most relish writing is that she commits murder with her supporting Oscar. Yeah, that was fun. I think he probably enjoyed that an awful lot. So, Michael, you are one of the villains, and a shoe fetishist to which I think is kind of funny that he's got all these sort of weird, creepy sorts of things going on with him.
Oh yeah, that was a blast. It's nothing like playing a guy like that. It's great.
It is always funny to watch though because the audience doesn't quite know what to think in the first scene where he keeps like pointing out with the heel and the shoe, and you kind of just get like the sense of like that's odd, and then by the second and third scene they find it hilarious.
Have you played villains before? Well, I know you've played. Renfield isn't really.
No, he's sympathetic, right? But I've actually been melodrama villains a few times, which is sort of as far as you can go with that. So
I played one once, and it was the most fun I ever had. Like the villains had a really good time. Yeah. So we have our murder victim here, Nicole Friedman. By the way, Faith Prince played this part on Broadway. Faith, who did our Salon last year. She's all over the place, and also every time you see her, it's a slightly different kind of a way, because she exists only in these flashbacks and in these memories of everybody. Any particular challenge in finding your way into?
I loved it. That was when I read it, I was so excited about the idea of getting to play this character who's only seen in flashbacks. The conceit is really smart, and it's super fun for me as an actress because she doesn't have to exist in reality. She only exists in this fantasy world, and so it's very freeing. You can make giant choices and obviously trust that Greg will pull me back when I need to be pulled back. But I get to make these huge choices because I'm just a memory, and especially right at the beginning when I'm in Max's memory, and of course he's the director, so it's very cinematic and dramatic, and each time I come out I feel I'm a little bit different, and that's super fun. That's seriously super fun. Not to mention the fact that I get to play with all these amazing people who crack me up every single time. Several of them I can't look in the eye when we're on stage for fear of actually laughing. So that's a delight.
Now we have Brian over here, who is the first murder suspect. So, Brian, now do you speak German?
No.
But you've done German accented characters before.
Yeah, I've been in cabaret a couple different times.
And one of your teachers was German, right?
Yeah, my high school drama teacher actually fought in World War II and for the Germans and defected to the Russians and had all kinds of crazy stories. So there's a little bit of him that lives on in my Max, which makes me happy.
Was there any particular director that you kind of were focusing in on as your template for who Max was?
Well, we talked a little bit in rehearsals about Billy Wilder to try to get a little bit of a hint of a German accent without going overboard. And in talking with Richard Kahneman, if any of you know him, Erich von Stroheim had apparently the ego that Max has. So I feel like maybe there's a little bit of that as well.
Yeah. It's interesting the way they maneuvered this with, it's almost like every scene there's a new suspect added to the show. Now, of course, the person we're supposed to think is the killer is Edward Connors, who's actually dead the whole play, too. But you don't really exist the way everybody's images of you are pretty much the same. He's not quite the sort of changing character that Lorraine is.
That's right. He's the candle on the water for the other characters. So all I had to do was just make sure I was as dashing and as egotistical as I could possibly be.
Have you ever played such a sort of really vile character before?
Yes, but I've usually managed to find an ounce of humanity in him, and that was the great part about this role. There really wasn't that much redeeming about him, so because he was a recollection within a flashback, an archetype, if you will, the Jungian archetype of the Boston banker, bootlegger, Hollywood producer.
Of course, based on Joseph Kennedy, who came out and was going to produce a movie for Gloria Swanson, had an affair with Gloria Swanson, and the movie pretty much wasted all his money and never was actually released. Queen Kelly, at least not released at the time. So Davin, right next to Michael, is playing a David O. Selznick, as well as a mariachi boy. So Selznick, I mean, it's not a big part, but it's kind of fun that he's there, and it references 1937 was Gone with the Wind was published in 1936, and Selznick actually got the movie rights before it was published. So, any particular thing you focused in on David Selznick?
I could only find like about 40 seconds of him actually talking as a person, so I just tried to like mimic his. He had a really weird smile, so I tried to do that. He had a really weird laugh, so I tried to incorporate a little bit of that. I don't know, pick up little quirks.
Yeah. And now, Justin, your Spider. The character of Spider comes from a movie called After the Thin Man, and the third in the series. And he's not called Spider, but he's that character, someone that Nick had put away, and now he encounters Nick again, and he's so thrilled to see him. And it's definitely, and that's also where the Big Taboo comes from that movie. There's a nightclub very much like that in that movie. What's more fun, being Spider or being a mariachi boy?
I think they're both super fun. I think with Spider, Greg and I had talked about he's like a little puppy dog, so he's like super excited all the time, and he's never walking, he's always running, or if he is stationary, he's always kind of bouncing, so I'm totally out of breath by the end of the Busy Night at Lorraine scene, and then I'm super out of breath when we get to the Big Taboo. I think that is so fun because I don't know if you know, but the three of us take it extremely seriously. Everyone's laughing, which is great, and having a good time, but we're like practicing backstage at every intermission, like getting those steps as perfect as possible. I think they're both super fun.
Okay, good. Who have I talked to over here? Oh, Will Jamona. Well, now you're in an interesting part because Nick really never has a romantic rival in the Thin Man movies. And this is sort of like the first time, it's not serious, at least not on Nora's part. And on the Broadway show, they did kiss during class, and I didn't have them do that because I thought that's probably one of the things that people felt. No, Nora would not do that. So, but she's obviously very entertained by the fact that this guy is into her, and he's kind of character. You found sort of some interesting things there between this guy who was a thug and now is.
Yeah, you kind of get this weird moment for a character who's a minor suspect, and suddenly has this big revelatory moment of like, I never really can achieve the one thing that I want, and how it's haunted him his whole life. And you kind of can then imagine this backstory, and it comes out of nowhere. It's interesting.
It's interesting if you listen closely here and there. There's a little bit of backstory about almost everybody. He's illegitimate, and Lieutenant Wolf's mother was a movie extra who apparently was treated very badly, which is why he has it out for movie people. There's a little. They met at school. In the original script, they met at UCLA, which was getting this enormous laugh. So we just changed it to we met at college, which still kind of gets a laugh. But you get to hear a little bit about everybody. Over here we have Nick DeScala. Is Dave with you?
No, we have to go.
Okay. Well, Nick is the fantastic reed player. And there is, by the way, a CD, original Broadway cast of this. And you listen to it for 5 minutes and you go, this show cannot be done without a saxophone. And which I think is very cleverly used. And you and Dave both did the arrangements for it, right?
Yeah, it wasn't, sometimes Dave usually does it himself. And sometimes it's real start from scratch because the music just doesn't exist in a form where you can easily pull, the brass are doing this, and the woodwinds are doing that, and the strings are doing this. This one had quite a lot of nice condensed orchestration in it, and then it was just a question of which is the most salient thing to pull out. And while I'm changing horns, I would love to play that, but I can't because I'm playing this, So sometimes it's a balancing act. But we did about half and half, I think.
He has a small mountain of instruments back there. I don't know if you noticed that every time you look at him, he's playing something else.
Yeah, he's not just playing sax.
He's that guy.
I want to mention, by the way, our fantastic choreographer, Stacey Arriaga. Nick and Nora are sort of set up as a Fred and Ginger, or that their kind of way into being musical is that they dance, which society people did back then. Why? Any particular things as far as recreating a Fred and Ginger feel?
No, I love Fred and Ginger, so I love to recreate their look. They were easy, and they were so easy to work with. So I was blessed to have like amazing.
Because they actually do dance. Brittany's a hardcore dancer, and Brian's like one step below a hardcore dancer. He's just core. He's a core dancer. Yeah. Questions? Any more questions from any of you? Yes.
Was that Charles Strauss's and Richard Maltby's only collaboration?
Yes, it was. Charles has done some other shows. He has about 5 musicals sitting in his trunk. Any other?
So, in the last about 2 minutes of the play, how ambiguous was the conclusion supposed to be about the business with the watch and the business with the two of them going out to see Lieutenant Wolf? Is it supposed to be absolutely clear-cut what's happening?
It's,
or is it supposed to be a little confusion?
I'm confused by it. But not by finding the watch, which also is actually in the Thin Man Ass that digs up,
But what
something
they do with the watch on stage and then what happens?
Yeah, well, no, I think that's not ambiguous. I think Nora's making it clear that she doesn't have it in her to hide a murder. That they've solved it and that she can't hide that. It's a little unclear what's happening to Yukito, Robert, and Tracy. She says, well, I'm going to get my movie made. And the truth is, as far as I can think of, there were 2 movie stars who were tried for murder back in the 20s and 30s. One was Fatty Arbuckle, who was finally, exonerated after his 3rd trial. And the other was, I can't remember his name. He was like a B-movie actor. So, being in the movie business had a big sway back there. And Yukito could actually legitimately claim self-defense because she was about to shoot him. So I don't really know what happens to Troy. What do you think happens to Tracy and Yukito?
I read it as she's going out to turn herself in. Is that the question that you were asking?
Yeah, it was a combination of how you read it and how you thought the script was saying.
Yeah, no, I think Nora's making it clear that has to happen. That Nora, in other words, she's making it clear that she can't.
I'm not going to cover it.
She's not going to cover it up.
And I think our friendship is strong enough in our past in our relationship that she's willing to give up sort of her freedom because she knows that I can't cover it.
Probably Tracy became an even bigger star. She finally got a real Oscar later.
You asked us about who knew the musical, but I wondered if any of the cast knew the show before you were in it.
Not just the legend of the show,
right?
Just the fact that it was such a spectacular flop with such a amazing cast and an amazing creative team. It was just, how could that possibly flop? So just kind of the legend of it, kind of like Carrie the musical.
Yes.
Everyone's certainly heard of Carrie the musical because it was, but I hadn't heard the actual CD.
And what do you think of it?
I think it's a great show. I think there are some things that you could change if you wanted, but I think it's really solid. I really don't understand why it was such a flop. I know it was kind of a great conjunction of many different things, and Broadway's kind of fickle as it is, but I think it's a great piece. It's got a lot of miles still left in it. I hope someone does it after this.
I think Greg did an amazing job of reviewing the script and revising it, and we all met in January and did a first read through, and we noticed the things that worked and some of the things that fell very heavily to earth. I think there was a little bit of mean-spirited in it, which diluted some of the fun.
I think it works really hard to try and take the mean-spiritedness out of it and focus on what was fun. And so it seems like that's worked. Thank you, everybody. You've been a fantastic audience. Tell your friends. Yes.
Where was asked?
I wanted him to make
one cross.
Truthfully, he's actually the way he's written in the show. On Broadway, he had 2 crosses.
Oh, he did.
But he's that whole thing about the doorbell rings and asks, I'll get it. That's the way it was actually written. That he stayed off stage most of the time. We sort of tried, and we couldn't get an Asta. For one thing, get the most expensive professional dog. It is, in fact, the Fox White-haired Terrier, which is what everybody thinks Asta is. In the book, is a Schnauzer. And finding one, and there's gunshots in this show, and we have a tiny backstage, and it just wouldn't have been the best situation. Yes, sir.
Well, I really like the show, but I've never seen so many actors do so well together. You guys should stay together.
Thank you.
You guys were perfect. I really loved it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just say, I'm sat in the lobby of the 42nd Street Moon Company's theatre, the Eureka Theatre in San Francisco, and I'm sitting here with Greg McKellen, who is the director of Nick and Nora. And first of all, thank you so much for putting the show on, because I never thought in a million years that I would ever have the chance to see it.
I didn't think so either. So that was one of the reasons I had to put it on.
Well, did you see the original production?
No, I did not see the original. I got the CD, of course, when it came out, and filed in the back of my brain that there were some good songs in it. And really, I became more interested about 2.5, 3 years ago. And I got an audio tape of the full Broadway production when I saw how intricate it was and how the score, there was a lot of underscoring used for effect. And I thought, this is an amazing score. And, the more I got into it, the more I realized how really terrific the score was. So that's kind of how I got interested.
Yes.
And we had done a 80th birthday salute to Charles Strauss about, whatever it was, 6 years ago. And he came out for that. And we talked a little bit about his various shows, that hadn't really had much a life since the original, like I and Albert and Dance a Little Closer.
Yes.
And this. But nothing more specific. But it kind of jogged my memory again to think about doing this.
So it was there after meeting him, and you.
It was, and the funny thing is, I thought it was licensed. I thought Samuel French must have it because they have Dance a Little Closer.
Oh, right.
And which ran less time than Nick and Nora.
Yes.
And but it wasn't, and it had, aside from this Australian, script in hand reading that Arthur Lawrence actually authorized himself. Nobody has done it.
Yes, because I came across the news of the Australian script in hand, and I think there is a little bit of footage on YouTube.
There is. A couple of their numbers are on YouTube.
That's right, yes. So that was interesting to see. And then, of course, I knew the history of it, and I remember getting tape when I got it, and I remember getting the tape and listening to it and going, oh, this is fantastic, and then it's closed. And so I thought, well, there you go. And that we'd never have a chance to see it again. It was interesting that when Thos Ribbits, who is one of our presenters in England, interviewed Charles Strauss, and Charles talked about it, and I don't know if you've read Put on a Happy Face.
Yes, sure, of course.
Yes. And the chapter about Nick and Nora is interestingly non-committal. There's a lot of left out, which I think is a shame, because now I don't know if this is true, but it feels that the concept was developed by Charles to begin with, and then he developed it with Arthur Lawrence, and then somebody else was going to do it first, was it?
I know that Charles came into it very early on. It was actually a producer who came up with the idea of a musical version of The Thin Man.
Okay.
And he got Arthur involved, and then also got Charles involved. There was another man who worked on the book with Arthur, and the two of them sort of plotted the whole thing.
Right.
I can't remember what the other man's name is, but they sort of figured out the whole mystery and the whole plot. And in fact, although it's not based on The Thin Man, there's a lot of the kind of plot twists that happen in The Thin Man. The same kind of twists happen in Nick and Nora. And then characters from, after The Thin Man, and a scene setting from after The Thin Man. But so that happened, and they had about, and Faith Prince, whom I've worked with a couple of times, told me about this too. But so I know they had something like 4 different workshops of it.
Oh gosh.
And they were, besides being workshops to work on the material, they couldn't raise the money. So finally, Arthur kind of got some more seasoned producers to come in, and the two, it's actually 2 men, but one specifically, who sort of started the whole thing, took a a minor credit in the show and didn't really have anything more to do with it, even though it was their idea to do it. But even then, the seasoned producers had trouble raising all the money, which is why it didn't have an out-of-town tryout. It was supposed to try out in Baltimore.
Right.
And they couldn't raise the money for Baltimore. So what it did was its out-of-town tryout in New York, which now is not at all unusual. It happens all the time.
Yes.
Back then, it was highly unusual. It didn't happen a lot.
They did something like 72 previews.
Exactly, yeah.
Ridiculous.
Like one more than Merlin. And although Beatlemania actually did a few more.
Oh, really?
Beatlemania was the only show back then that did an extended preview period in New York and then was actually a success. So the other shows that did it, like Saravah and Merlin, were not successes. And so I think that was one of the things that really hurt the show.
Yes.
Was not being able to go out of town and work on it away from New York. And as far as Charles is not having a lot in the book, I have yet to encounter anybody who was involved with it who didn't feel traumatized by the entire situation.
Really?
It was just
not a happy production.
It was just one of those things where there were just so many different elements, and none of them gelled, and none of them made people happy, and the working situation wasn't good, and then particularly for people who'd been with it from the beginning, like Faith and Joanna Gleason and Christine Baranski and Barry Bostwick, to have done all those workshops, and then suddenly it's gone in a week.
Yes.
And so I think people were just,
they were just tired, and
nobody has really wanted to revisit this.
Well, maybe now it's more contained. It's not the kind of long drawn out process as much. It is just a matter of staging it. So maybe there is more legs in it. So
and in our case, we're not in New York. It's 23, 24 years later, and we're away from theatrical buzz. And what we found from the minute we announced it, which is about a little over a year ago, people were really interested and intrigued. And I think actually a lot of them didn't know the show. They just were intrigued that there was a musical of Nick and Nora written by, Charles Strauss and Richard Maltby and Arthur Lawrence. So from the beginning, it had an entirely different kind of buzz for us
than
it had in New York. It had the buzz of people being excited and eager to see it.
Yes.
And so for us, it's been a completely different experience.
And it's such a beautiful score. I mean,
I
think it has some of his best songs and melodies. And there's an online, which you sent me, the link to the review done by Pat
Collins.
Yes. And it's vile. I mean, it's actually vile. And listening to her, she's trying to do all this clever rhetoric, and then at the end she says nobody likes being a critic and doing things like that. And I thought, well, you've just reveled in everything you've just said that is scathing about the show, and I think it's unfounded to a certain degree.
It's interesting because I did not see it. I've heard it, but I did not see it, and why it got such. Although actually some of the reviews said, their buzz was so bad by the time they opened.
Right.
And, some of the reviews said, well, this isn't as bad as we thought. And a lot of the reviews did, single out that there are some really good songs in this.
Yeah.
And they got a Tony nomination for it. But just the whole buzz was so bad. I don't know how they could have overcome that, unless the critics came in and said, forget the buzz, this is fantastic. And they didn't. And the critics, I think, were caught up in the buzz as well.
Do you think a lot of the buzz... I mean, it's kind of notoriously gone down as having a bad atmosphere. Do you think some of that leaked into the production when people... You mentioned, and in the Q&A, you mentioned a feeling of mean-spiritedness in the...
Yes, I think to some degree the original show did not meet people's expectations for Nick and Nora.
Right.
People had in their minds, Nick and Nora, the Thin Man, it's fun, it's light, it's upbeat, it's quick repartee, and to some degree, I think more so in the script than in the score. It didn't meet those expectations. It kind of, and I know Arthur Lawrence wanted to sort of put a more contemporary, even though it's still set in the 30s, put a more contemporary spin on Nick and Nora.
He actually said that he hadn't realised until the show opened how much people affiliated Nick and Nora with William Powell and Myrna Loy.
I don't think it was actually that they weren't seeing Nick Powell and Loy. I think it's that they weren't seeing Nick and Nora.
Right.
In the way that they envisioned them from all those movies. And so I don't think Powell and Loy were so... I don't think it was that they couldn't overcome them. It's that in the way the show delivered this iconic couple, it just didn't meet what people would have expected from the Nick and Nora that they knew. And in some cases, maybe kind of trounced on it or flaunted the fact that it was much edgier and darker than people.
Well, I was kind of expecting that, but I have to say I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it did have a lot of the feeling from the movies, and I've been a big fan of the movies ever since they were shown on TV when I was a kid. They used to get shown on a Friday night after school. So
there's a tweak here and a tweak there, and
I think that Ryan and Brittany do bounce off each other very well.
I think what was important to me was to restore Nick and Nora.
Right.
And I feel like that involved focusing in on the places in the play where they were there and maybe getting obscured by so much stuff that was going on in the original. And it's interesting because it does not give its leads, its stars, any kind of a break. They're on constantly.
Well, this is what I meant, and it came out a little wrong. I said that it was a mammoth thing to watch, but I meant it was a mammoth undertaking. I meant it in a positive way. I hope none of the cast thought I meant it.
Yeah.
But it was, and they're enormous roles.
They are.
Enormous.
And what's lucky for us with Ryan and Brittany, there it was just, as I said, a different buzz, different expectations. We knew we had to deliver something that was not going to jar people away from their idea of Nick and Nora.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they didn't have all of New York looking in on them, and it had been done, and they just didn't have that kind of onus on them that the original did. And so we worked very hard to make this feel like the Nick and Nora you would expect if you were a fan of the movies.
Yes, I think you succeeded very much.
Thank you.
It was, and I have to say, your pianist, your musical director,
Dave Dabrowski.
I mean, incredible work because he looked. I remember looking at him thinking he looks tired as he began, and I knew that he was going to be playing the whole thing. It was really an incredible performance from him and also from
Nick DeScala
on the woodwinds. Really,
and they don't get a break either because there's so much underscoring.
Yes,
that they're there. If they're not playing, they're going to be playing in another minute or so.
Because it's an unusual score like that. Because it's, even though the cast album has split the numbers up into very, self-contained songs, the true thing is actually very, very fluid, and songs get interrupted by a dialogue much more than any other normal musical might, isn't it? You only get a few numbers which are contained.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. The cast album, I haven't really asked Charles about this, but the cast album sort of represents how he and Richard wanted to present the show to the world, or present their score, I should say, to the world. And in 2 or 3 cases, they actually used different lyrics than were heard on Broadway. And so they tried to make it be the best listening experience it could be for those who were coming to it just as a CD.
Yes.
As opposed to people who were seeing it in the theater and following a story and that kind of thing.
Well, I think there's I've talked to a lot of people who haven't seen the show but are aware of the cast album, and it is, I think a lot of people do favour it very much as a great part of Charles's work. And the orchestrations are beautiful as well. I mean, you were limited here, but they did amazing with what they did. Yeah. I think at the beginning I kind of missed the sweeping violins, but then, within 5 or 10 minutes, I wasn't aware of that at all. So,
Thank you.
You cast extremely well. I mean, there's so much going on, and everyone seemed working very well as an ensemble.
Thank you. This was actually cast last summer in I think July.
Right.
We cast this show, July or August. And I'm very lucky that nobody had to drop out for something else.
Yes.
And they're still with me. And they're just a fantastic group of people. I got sort of the cream of the crop of Bay Area performers with this show, and I'm very lucky to have them.
Yes. Well, they were wonderful. I mean, it was a joy to watch. It really was. So, thank you so much again for putting it on. If you do ever get a chance to see Nick and Nora anywhere, let's hope that what has happened here is
at the beginning.
At the beginning,
maybe it will be. It would be wonderful if
Absolutely.
It was.
And maybe we could just talk very briefly about
42nd Street Moon.
42nd Street Moon. Yes. So tell me a little about the history of this, because you specialise in doing a lot of shows that have disappeared or have been forgotten,
right,
as well as doing some that are
more familiar,
real classics.
Where's Charlie?
Yes.
We started. This all came out of a recording project I did in the late 80s and early 90s with 6 CDs on a label called Shadowland, there were 2 Kern CDs, there were movie musicals of the 30s CD, and then a couple of cut songs from Broadway shows or songs from flops. And, that really spiked my interest in, trying to produce some of this stuff. At the same time, there was a company in New York in the mid-'80s called the New Amsterdam Theatre Company, which they weren't the first company to do concert musicals, but they were the first that kind of made a season of it. And, they survived, I think, for about 4 or 5 years, and then the man who founded it passed away, Bill Tynes. But, there were tapes out of those concerts and shows like Kern's Sweet Adeline and I Married an Angel, Rodgers and Hart. And to be able to hear and Cole Porter's Jubilee.
Yes.
To be able to hear those, it just was eye-opening to me. And to hear how funny some of the scripts were. And so that kind of became an obsession of mine. And what happened when I moved up here, out of those CDs, I became acquainted with Stephanie Rhodes, who co-founded the company with me.
Mm-hmm.
And we both had the same idea, which is that we wanted to do a company like New Amsterdam Theatre Company.
Right.
And do, concert musicals. And just as we were starting, Ian Marshall Fisher, before we started, had started the Lost Musicals over in London. I think a couple of years before we started.
That's when I think he started them at the Theatre Museum, Covent Garden. I saw a couple of those.
Yeah. And so this was this whole period when, John McGlynn was doing all these restoration recordings of scores and concerts, and there was sort of like a, find all these old musicals buzz going around back then. And so Stephanie knew a theater owner, not this one, a theater downtown. And she knew some people, so we decided let's do 3 of these. Let's do 3, 1 a week, which was insane. We actually did. We did 1 week, then we rehearsed, then did the next show, and then rehearsed.
So a real rep.
Show. Yeah, yeah. Well, it really was. And we opened with Cole Porter's Jubilee.
Yes.
Then we did One Touch of Venus, and then we did an old Kern and Woodhouse show called Oh Lady Lady. And by sheerest luck, well, first, the main theater critic at the Chronicle at the time, Gerald Boardman, was friendly with both, very good friends with Stephanie and also friendly with me. So he gave us press that we wouldn't otherwise have warranted, being a startup, new little company at the time. But in addition, the week we did Oh Lady Lady, the P.G. Woodhouse Society was having its annual convention in San Francisco.
Right.
And so we sold out this 1918 musical. We actually sold out all 3 of those shows. And the theater came back and said, "Can you do 3 more in the fall?" This was the summer. And so we said, "Well, sure." So we did 3 more in the fall. We did Do Barry Was a Lady and Cole Porter, and we did Kern's Sweet Adeline and another Porter, 50 Million Frenchmen.
Oh, yeah.
Same thing, you know. It was like, wow, we hit on this magic thing. And so we actually became a nonprofit company and, you know, got a board and all of that. And we were down at this little theater, and at that time we were very much script in hand with not a lot of staging. Usually the musical numbers were a little more staged than but there was staging. And as the years went on, we became a little more advanced. And then it was in 2000 that we moved to this theater, which used to be a movie theater. And then we began to have a little bit more with costuming and a little bit more with set. We're very limited in what we can do here, but we can do a little bit. And set-wise, I mean.
Yes.
And then we began to start losing the scripts. And finally, in our 15th anniversary, which was 2008, we decided we're going to lose the scripts from now on. We will not do them with scripts. And we didn't, and we began to add more set and costume kinds of pieces, and we no longer had people sitting around in the back of the stage, you know, with the concert kind of idea. And it sort of evolved in the, 7 years since then, into what it is now, which is, it's pretty much the show as best as we can put it on in this little theater.
Absolutely. And I think what you've got here is it's a beautiful little theater. I mean, it's really very nice. And it seems perfect. And the things you're doing, I mean, let's have a look at some of the shows that you've done. So, these are all shows that you've put on here. So we've got,
Gentlemen
we've got wonderful standards like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
The Cabaret Girl, which
Girl.
Was the American premiere of that. And we did the Golden Apple.
Wow, the Golden Apple.
Yeah, Fiorello.
Fiorello.
Superman, we've done twice.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Too Many Girls.
And I have the recording of Leave It to Me.
Leave It to Me. We didn't record. We also recorded something for the boys, which we've done 3 times now. When we did it the first time, and that was one of the really fun things. What happened was, our second season, we got the rights to do a Rodgers and Hart show called Peggy Ann, which had not been done since, its post-Broadway tour in 1926-27.
Wow.
So we did that, and Tom Briggs, who was then one of the representatives of Rodgers and Hammerstein, came out and saw it, and he thought we did such a great job with it that he sort of opened up the vaults for us. He gave us the rights then to As Thousands Cheer, which was this legendary 30s review by Moss Hart and Irving Berlin. And we did the first time this was before the Broadway revival.
Yeah.
First time that had been done. And so we started, I already had a relationship with the Porter Trust, so getting their obscure shows. I'll tell you, the first time we did, when we did Sweet Adeline, we couldn't get the rights, even though it was technically licensed.
Yes.
And I had I had gotten to know Betty Kern, his daughter, when I did those 2 Kern CDs.
Yes.
And I called her up and I said, Betty, they aren't letting us do Sweet Adeline. She said, well, let me make a phone call. And she did, and suddenly we had Sweet Adeline. So very lucky to have a couple of connections, and so we began to do these things. And people came. They came to see. A bad show for us was 78 to 80% sold tickets. And so it was sort of magical. When we moved over here, by then we were doing, we started 1 week, then we immediately, the fall shows we did in the fall, we did 2 weeks. And by the next year, we were running the shows for 3 weeks. And by the time we came here, this doubled our audience size. So it took us, a couple of years to kind of get people used to us being here and to be where we could fill this size theater. And so then, it's been dicey since the big financial crash in 2008. And that, in fact, when it happened, we were doing Irma La Douce, and then Girl Crazy, and then Ben Franklin in Paris. And
wow.
Those were not... Well, Girl Crazy was. Girl Crazy was a huge hit. They weren't the best shows to be doing in the middle of a financial meltdown when people were just, they came running to Girl Crazy because it had famous songs and they knew the title. And so since then, we're constantly trying to find our way as to what do people want to see. That whole era is gone now when people could just dig up these old musicals and people would come running for the novelty of it.
Yeah.
And that's gone. And so, like next year we're doing The Boys from Syracuse, which we have done before, and Most Heavy Fella. But we're also doing Sail Away, which is
I think I may have to come back for that. Because I've been dying to see
Allison,
that.
whom you saw as Tracy today, is doing the Elaine Stritch.
Well, that's perfect casting.
That's what we're opening with. So that's
when will that be?
That'll be in October, November.
I will try my damnedest to see that
I'll
one.
Send you the dates. And any of it, and then we're doing a new musical, Scrooge in Love, and we've kind of really opened ourselves up to the idea. When we first started, I felt like there are any number of places that new musicals can go to get produced.
Yes,
and I want to focus on this vast repertoire from the past that won't necessarily get produced. But I sort of changed my opinion because now new musicals have a hard time, any musical has a hard time getting up these days. So we're doing a new musical by Larry Grossman, who wrote Minnie's Boys and Snoopy and Good Time Charlie, all of which we've done all three of those.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Good Time Charlie is one of my favorites.
Mine
it's
too.
Beautiful. I love the score.
Oh my gosh.
I met Hal Hackaday once, and it was when I was much younger, and I had no idea who he was, and it was one of my things.
Someday on one of your trips, Larry Grossman's in L.A.
Oh, really?
Yes. And he has the best stories.
Wow.
And Good Time Charlie was my first trip to New York. It's the third show I saw on Broadway.
Really?
Yeah.
It is beautiful.
It's a gorgeous score.
They give me goosebumps when I listen to
it. Larry actually gave me about 3 cut songs that we put into our version here.
Really?
Yeah, it was terrific. And almost did it again next season, but we didn't.
Okay. Well, if you do it the season after, I will be back to sing.
Anyway, so Larry has written this Scrooge in Love with Dwayne Poole and with Kellen Blair. And Kellen wrote an earlier new musical we did called Murder for Two, which
there's now
in New York.
Broadway.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a whodunit.
Exactly. Well, yes, you're right. Actually, I forgot that one.
Now, your next show is
Where's Charlie?
Where's Charlie? Another show that I did in summer stock. I know that somebody was trying to get the rights to do it in England. They will not let it be done in England anymore. Wow. Now, I don't know. There was an actor called Andrew O'Connor, and he was touring in Barnum, and a friend of mine was the violinist in the show. This was years ago, and she'd done summer stock with me in Cape Cod with the College Light Opera Company. She'd done Where's Charlie? She'd been playing in the pit. So, and then he mentioned Where's Charlie, and she started singing the song, and he was like, nobody's heard of this. And apparently he tried to get the rights to do it in England.
Didn't Ian Marshall Fisher do it? Of course, that
would have been just the Lost Musicals, which is very
scripted several years ago too.
Apparently at the time, I don't know if it's changed, but I'm surprised because it's a great score. Again,
I'll tell you, I think there's some weird rights things with that because the movie has never been issued on DVD or video or anything.
She doesn't like it, does it, Joe?
Well, that's not necessarily true. Someone asked about it 3 or 4 years ago.
Yes.
Encores did it. And someone asked at the talkback, is this ever going to come out on DVD? And she said, yes, I think it's going to come out very soon now. I think we've worked everything out.
Wow.
So I don't know if it's true that she hadn't liked it or if there were just underlying rights issues, but it makes me think there's just some weird stuff with the rights if now you can't do the show in England.
Yes. Now, I don't know how true that is, and if anyone knows, please post on Facebook or our website. Well, it's great that you're doing it, and it is, some of the songs and numbers are enormous fun.
Yes. And I should mention that the she we were talking about was Jo Sullivan Lesser, who's Frank Lesser's widow.
Yes.
And
so maybe that's all a legend, the fact that she doesn't like it.
It's interesting too. It's never been... There's not a CD of it. There's not... Well, there's the CD of the original London cast from back in the 50s.
Which is bizarre. Is kind of it's bizarre that there's only a London CD.
Well, the reason it wasn't recorded here, there was a recording strike.
Oh, really?
And so by the time the strike was over, they did record Once in Love with Amy and Make a Miracle, but that was it. They never did. I don't know why they never went back in after it was over to do it, but they didn't. And that was why that didn't get recorded. But I'm surprised that John Yapp or some of those people have not done so I don't know if they're just weird rights issues or not. We got it. We didn't have trouble getting the rights. And
they've done it plenty of times in Summer Stock, and it's done plenty of times over here. Could you just...
Where's Charlie? Opens April 29th and runs to May 17th.
And we should say as well that Where's Charlie it's the musical version of Charlie's Aunt, which is a great classic English farce. And it made Roy Bolger, he was a star, but it made him a huge star, didn't it? So... And Once in Love with Amy is the very famous number from it. Exactly. And Norman Wisdom was in it.
But he did the London, and that's the only CD you can hear.
And Pip Hinton.
Pip Hinton, exactly.
Who I saw her in Nonsense, in the original London production of Nonsense. I think I also saw her in Anyone Can Whistle.
Oh?
Strangely enough.
Interesting.
Playing the Mayoress. So...
and then in the fall, if you're in California, we're doing Sail Away in October, November, and Scrooge in Love in November, December.
With Jason
Graw.
Yes, Jason Graw.
Starring in Scrooge in Love. He's fabulous. He did Little Me for us a couple of years ago. And I've known him for, years and years and years and years and years.
Wonderful. I first came across him on Olympus on My Mind.
Oh, right, yes, exactly.
Which is a wonderful, fun show. And then, of course, I was aware of him from Lucky Stiff, many other shows since. And Drat the Cat, he did the recording. Now, could you do Drat the Cat?
I thought about it.
If I'm going to request anything.
I thought about it. And to me, the score feels like it's lacking one big punchy number. Okay. It has a couple of fantastic songs. She's Roses and She Touched Me.
Yes.
And I think Holmes and Watson is really cute. And a couple of others are... it has some terrific songs. I would say it's a possibility, and we might get there.
Yes, well, let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
I do know what you mean, though. It does lack a big...
It doesn't have the big, fun, kind of catchy melody, sort of chorusy number that...
Although, when I do listen to it, I do wish that Ira Levin had written more musicals, because I think his lyrics are great.
Yeah.
So, well, there we go. Greg, thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm so happy. So thank you so much for your time and for speaking and for reviving Nick and Nora here at 42nd Street Moon.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
So will Nick and Nora be seen again? I certainly hope so. Thankfully, we do have the cast album, so you can hear for yourself the wonderful songs by Charles Strauss and Richard Maltby Jr. I can honestly say that I think they are some of the best songs that Charles Strauss has written, and if you don't know the show, do take the time to search it out. My thanks again to Greg McKellen for his time, and also to all the cast and creatives who brought this forgotten show back. Thank goodness there are companies out there who are reviving these shows. Long may they continue. And if you didn't quite catch who did it, well, funnily enough, it was The Butler.
This episode of Musical Talk was presented and edited by Dominic McChesney and Nick Hudson. For more information, please do visit our website, musicaltalkpodcast.weebly.com. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/musicaltalk or Facebook at facebook.com/musicaltalk. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.